Are you listening?
This is the Rob Scott Show.
Damn.
I mean, really, like, if we're not trying to change the world, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Welcome back to the Rob Scott Show. It's me and Sarah, as usual. How are you, Sarah?
Good. Yeah, just dodging the coffee spills today.
Yeah. Sarah just had a major coffee spill that pushed the timing of this back a scotch. I had recently had one of those. We were just talking about the kind of explosion that coffee can become when hurled, through gravity at things and whatever. So yeah, total
But
mess.
I'm happy to be here with you today, and I'm excited to talk about something new, but maybe we should start at the beginning. So maybe you can lead it.
I mean, we can always, do a weird order, start in the middle, get to the end, and then reveal the beginning.
We like
later,
to confuse our listeners.
Yeah, for sure.
What we're saying all the time.
100%. Yeah, why not? Let's definitely do that. No, let's start. I think we want to get into lenses today a little bit, right? How do you feel about going into thought a little bit first, kind of giving that a quick structure? I know we talk about that a lot, but just quick what we mean by that, get into beliefs a little bit, what we mean by that, and then we can sort of reveal this power of lenses and sort of what's going on there. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, and I think especially if you're not someone that listens regularly, that will make the most sense. And also, I hope to have many more podcasts kind of digging into lenses. So if we build a kind of foundation for what we're even talking about here, I think this will be very useful.
Good. And again, guys, just if you are listening to a lot of these, this is all in service of a way more comprehensive training that's coming out that'll be totally available and free and exciting to check out. And this is both in support of that to give sort of different perspectives, but also very soon, if you're listening to this in the future, there should be something available to go back to that sort of has visuals and explains this much more concretely and smartly through the whole kind of system and what we mean by all these things specifically. But let's talk about thought for just a second to start us off. If you imagine, let's say Sarah and I were in the same room, there's a lot of things going on for humans that are just sitting in a room, right? We're experiencing objects, we're having sensations, we're end up feeling emotional about certain things. We can use conversation, but a big part of what we're doing is we're modeling and we're thinking about all kinds of stuff. We can try to model the future. We can remember the past through some type of an imagination and a thinking. A lot of this very unconsciously is happening in a predictive way, right? Surprise is actually when something breaks your prediction of what you were expecting to happen in the next moment. And so
like a coffee spill,
that can be, what happened, but somebody jumping out when you just don't think anybody's there, that kind of thing. It literally breaks your model of your thought, in most people's cases, your unconscious thought about what was going to happen next. And so boom, we have surprise. Humor's probably related to this a little bit. We end up getting, we hear something and there's like a pattern, we're expecting something different comes up and we're surprised in a humorous way. But what's going on there with thinking, and the way that I want to talk about that is we are potentially modeling things, and we're simulating, we're modeling, we're thinking. These are all words that may at certain times have slightly different meanings, but for right now, they mean very similar things. We're using our own cognition to think about what is, what might be, what was, all these different things. And we have this cocktail of thinking going on in our mind. Is that kind of a clear place to start, or do you have anything you want to add to that?
Which we've said in prior podcasts that understanding this is kind of foundational to everything. So if you're like, where are you going with this? I mean, we're setting the stage, we're shining a light on the thing that's kind of everything, so to speak. So that's why we're kind of trying to get as clear as possible around
and it doesn't mean that it literally doesn't mean that thought is everything, right? Don't misunderstand that. It's that we so regularly get lost in thought. And so much of our human suffering is not actually because a boulder is rolling at us. So much of our, certainly in the quote unquote, the first world or the wealthier countries and all that, like most of us are way safer than we realize. We have way more abundance than we realize. And what's actually going on, a lot of our suffering is in this thought space. We're modeling poorly, we're modeling into states of anxiety and overwhelm and upset and all these things. And a lot of our psychological health is managing this meaning making that we're doing, this thinking that's happening. So much of our thinking is we can use it in a lot of different ways. We can plan with it. We can try to think through things. What would be the best thing to happen next? We can create parties with friends, all the cool things that can happen through thinking. Much of what's going on in our consciousness is we're trying to get a quote unquote grip on reality, right? There's a lot of things going on. There's sensations and feelings and what other people are saying and what something meant, right? Somebody said something or they gave me a certain look, and what does that mean? And so I'm making up what things mean. And through that, again, very unconsciously for most of us, we end up with a quote unquote like grip on reality. Or, John Vervaeke says things like relevance realization, right? This idea of our consciousness. And that's why if a big loud sound goes off, it'll pull our attention because there's some unconscious to you process running in your mind that's like, that might be dangerous. So it needs your attention when it's loud, right? So we're constantly being bounced around the complexities of life, and we're constantly trying to like get a grip on reality. We're trying to say, what did that mean? Where should I go? What should I do? Like, this is the complexity of living. And so much of this is running in our own imagination space, right? This is a huge part, trying to describe just lots of ways that we use thought. But much of this is to come to this kind of grip of, what did that mean? What should I do? What's my next move? Those kinds of things that are happening for us. And so we end up talking about belief a lot. And I think one important way to talk about belief in the way that we talk about it here is not religious belief. I know I always say that to sort of get us away from that conversation, but it's this assuredness of the meaning that we're making up in any moment. So your thinking or my thinking or anybody's thinking that's happening, to the degree that we are positive that that is the right meaning that we're making, I would say that we're believing in that moment, or we're believing in that concept, or we're believing in that position. And many of our beliefs are accurate. They're right. When you see a chair and you believe it's there, and you walk over and you modeled sitting in it before you sat in it, and you decided to sit, and then it's there. That was a quote unquote right belief. Like, you were accurate about the chair, right? And on that level of physical things, many of those are very persistent and real. And, we're not doubting any of that. But again, so much of our life is up in the thinking space that's now like modeling what somebody felt or meant, or if I say this, I know they're going to respond this way. And those become spaces where we're inaccurate quite often, right? We don't model that in the same kind of consistent way that we would model what sitting in a chair is like, right? Because we've left the purely physical realm, and now we're up into other people's minds and their modeling and what language means and all these different things. However, you will watch people be very assured of the meaning of something. And I always use the example of, like, your boss looks at you down the hall, they give you a funny look, and you're quite sure, you believe in that moment that that means that your boss is mad at you, or maybe you're going to get fired or whatever. That belief space may or may not be accurate. And then we get into, but the point to like define what belief is like, how attached to your assuredness of what that meant are you, right? And so it's not bad to be any way here, but the more sure you are, I would say, the more you're believing the meaning that you're making in the moment. So essentially, that's a certain grip on reality in that moment, right? That moment with your boss down the hall, I see something, I take it to mean something. That meaning is a thought that I'm adding or putting in or trying to analyze what's happening. And then to whatever degree I'm gripping on that as factual is my level of belief in that grip of reality, that scenario. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah. And I
Okay.
guess maybe let's pause really quick at
Yeah.
beliefs, just because I want to talk a little bit more about them. If you think about the assuredness of meaning and the attachment to that, like, it really brings a lot into perspective about how beliefs can, well, I'll call them wrong, can go wrong. Something can go wrong with them, because I think a belief in itself potentially has a lot of usefulness, and it defines things. And so if you can attach the right amount, whatever that is, to whatever the belief may be, then you're probably doing something pretty right, and it's
Yeah.
probably working out really well for you. And so I just to kind of speak into everyone who's like, don't, we are a country and a nation and a people that are like all about our beliefs and
Yes.
standing for our beliefs. And, especially kind of in this political climate of this year of 2020, it shows very. So for everyone who kind of gets their feelers out when we start to kind of talk about belief in a different way, it's the level of attachment to belief. And your example of the boss on the hall is a good one. Another example that you've given that kind of speaks to me is like the idea that, you know, you have a cup, you're holding a cup in your hand, and it's a cup and it's a mug or something. Somebody comes up behind you and attacking you. If your belief is like so attached, like this is a cup, I drink from it, that's all I do with it, then and you've lost the ability to see it as a weapon or see it as a, you know, as a tool for something else, to hold something else, then you're, you know, limiting yourself, which is kind of where you know, when beliefs go wrong, we'll say, I mean, when they're causing you a limit of some way. So that's like a physical example. The other, the limit of like, oh, you know, I'm so attached to that idea that my boss is going to fire me, you know, I kind of self-sabotage at work. But like there's almost an endless amount of, like, we could almost take every thought that becomes any kind of meaning, right? Because all thoughts are to make meaning. Belief is an assuredness of that meaning. So we can almost look at every single thought and say, like, here's a context where that would be like a useful thought. Here's where it starts to limit you. Here's how, if you detach from how much that, you know, it has to be that way, you know, this variety kind of options opens up for you. So it's just to echo what you're saying about beliefs, nothing new there, but just to kind of reiterate that it's not the belief itself that's a problem. It's the level of attachment in the context of when you're having it that can really
and so I love that, and that points out something that I think is really important to like put front and center. This is not an argument to not believe or to believe or anything like that. This is a description of like what we're doing. This is just this is what's happening. And if we're unaware of it, we can get overly attached or too detached, or, you know, like it doesn't help us in the modeling that we're doing. So in one sense, I think when I was much younger and I was trying to work out these ideas, I mean, literally decades ago, I think I was very like, let's not believe in anything in the way that I meant belief at that time. But I think that it's more clear to say that in any moment, you have to make up a meaning to be human and have a position and choose to do anything. All of that, and this will hopefully be revealed even more clearly in the training that we're talking about, but all of that is actually happening within your skull, right? All of that is going on in a model in your head. The part of the delusion is that it feels like it's very external and that you're not really creating that along with the reality, that you're not kind of meeting reality in this co-creation of how you feel about things and what something means and all that stuff. So what we're doing is we're dialing up the awareness muscle that this is happening. And then that grip or that relevance realization in any moment of like what's happening, what's most important, all that is totally meaningful. And whatever you decide is going on there, whether that's conscious or unconscious, you're believing in that moment to some degree, like that, there's your belief at stake. But what we'll find is that psychologically, so many times when we're suffering or confused or feel stuck or something, we are overly attached to one of these dimensions of meaning that we just can't kind of get free of. So this is this attachment to belief or insistence on belief, or just we can't even see it any other way. To your point, like when you can't spectralize the cup into a different purpose, right? And so oftentimes just working with a coach, even if they don't really understand what we're talking about or know about, very often that's just think differently about something. What if you considered it like this? Or, you know, this is true in therapy as well. Well, what if your mom wasn't this villain and instead she was just trying her best with you, and you go, oh, and now you've just changed the meaning on what mom meant to you. And now mom's much more okay or whatever. Like, and I don't want to oversimplify that, but, you know, a lot of hard work can go into changing our beliefs about what was true in the past, what's true now, what's true going forward. So the more that we can become aware that we are simulating, modeling in our thinking, and ultimately coming up with what things mean, right? What is the meaning of this moment? What does that look mean? What do my desires mean about me? You know, what do I have goals? Am I connected to my value? All these things are meaning making that we're doing. We're moving our attention around to keep doing that in all the directions. As we get attached to those, I would just say that's our level of belief, right? However much we're sort of attached to something, it gets closer and closer to a real solidified belief. We back up from that. We have a little bit more freedom to maybe play with some of that meaning. And this isn't as meaningful to change solid reality as it is what thoughts or what somebody else might feel about us. Like those are very malleable and changeable in the moment, but we still get really attached to them.
Right.
That
Yeah.
make
And
sense?
and I was just going to say, as another aside, that it's like I think we realize that it's more that like we as humans and our mind is like more complex than the examples that we're giving
Mhm.
for the sake of time and this conversation. We're trying to simplify it into examples that make perfect illustrations, but um there's a whole bunch of complexity and nuance to changing. If you mess with the one attachment of a belief, that either creates 20 other stronger, it tightens the attachment on 20 other things, or loosens it on the one big thing or whatever. Like, this is all interchangeable, and so that's why we keep kind of coming back to this foundational, the meaning making thing, because
Yeah.
it's not just, oh, this is my problem, Rob, I can't get over this one thing. It's the skill of navigating all of it, because
Mhm.
as simple as it is, the cup being a cup or a weapon, that totally illustrates what we're talking about. And also, like, you know how many other people in the room, and what do you believe about like the chair and your environment and your capabilities. Like, it's never just like, I have a one single thought about this
Yeah.
and that will solve it. So the game here to play is to win at getting good at navigating all of that, which
Yeah,
is
but
why.
that's great. So I love that. But that like one thing over time, it's not one thing, but that grip in any one moment kind of is
Right.
one thing. And that's
Right.
almost the error. Like when I say that we live in a delusion, that meaning that we make in any one moment that we just decide is what it is, that has such a potential to be slightly wrong in all these different ways. What that person meant, what I remember about this, what I think is important to do, those are all the dials of the moment that we're talking about playing with. The more solidified that I am and sure I have that right, I know what it is, now I'm stuck, I can't possibly win, whatever meaning I'm making about that moment, the more now I've slammed down a very complex reality into one meaning, right, about this moment or about me or about that person or whatever, which is an enormous oversimplification. And
Right. And
so
we talked about that around the self. When you
yeah,
try to describe yourself as one thing, it
yeah,
oversimplifies.
yeah. And so that skill of living a little bit looser in that complexity gives you options, right? But there's reason historically and evolutionarily that we've simplified these down. It helps make decisions. It helps go, the person's bad, not going to deal with them, do this, do that, and often can help us move forward. But in the ever growing complexity of everything, that's where we need to grow another skill of nuance here. And so that's what's going on. So this belief thought combination, right, which is like meaning making and then your own attachment to that meaning making, we have a great analogy for that in this form of lenses, right? And we talk about having lenses in some way. And the reason we use this analogy is because if you think of a lens, and I often share this story, and it's something that I just want everybody to kind of get. If you think of a lens like in glasses or microscope, telescope, whatever, a lens has a couple of functions. And one of them is very obvious and we know about it usually. But the second one is usually hidden from people until we actually think about it. So the first one is that lenses alter what you see, right? As we're looking through the lens, it's making something more blurry. If you have a rose colored lens, it's going to make it a different color. It can make it bigger or smaller depending on the lens structure of multiple lenses or not. We use these to alter what we see and see things really far away, see things really close. Obviously, I use them to fix my vision. They alter what we see for sure. But the other part, the second dimension of a lens that most people don't consider is that they're built to be invisible. And so what I mean by that is if you had raindrops on your glasses or scratches, they wouldn't function as well because they're not supposed to be looked at, they're supposed to be looked through. And as we look through the lens, we really tend to forget about the lens and we don't consider them. So that happens to me every day while I'm wearing my glasses. I don't normally even think about having glasses on, but it's definitely altering what I see. And it's doing that unconsciously to me. Now, not all the time. I take them on and put them off. Sometimes I'm aware of them. But the thing is that our thinking and the level of our attachment to belief of that meaning making is very much like lenses psychologically. And what that means is that we end up with these certain meanings that come online as we look at a certain situation, and it alters our reality, our thinking about something, and it's invisible to us. The fact that it's affecting our view becomes invisible to us. So lenses psychologically are, something that I think is a really useful metaphor, analogy, whatever, to consider how our meaning making can alter how we feel about something, how we think about something, how we feel about another person. And it's happening to us usually unconsciously. And so this is a great way to think about when we have self-sabotage behaviors or stuck procrastination or these things. Inside, there are ways that we're thinking about ourselves, about the world, about other people, about our relationships, whatever. And we can't see that they're just a lens, just a thought, just a meaning that we're making up, and we get really attached to them. So I don't know if that makes sense in that order.
Yeah,
We
I
often,
mean, I really like lenses, and it's such a big part of being able to explain and understand and experience the fundamental shift. We don't often, in current days, deep dive into lenses, you and I, because it's just kind of one of our core teachings that I think we both get. But when we get a chance to kind of pause and go through the nuances of lenses, it reminds me of how good of an analogy it really is.
mm,
And some things that went into my, like, that I was thinking about when you were talking about them is we've talked about presence, and that there's a lot going on in our head that creates a reality, but like everything is always there and it's beautiful. And if you can just be with it, not judge it, not be with it in relation to yourself, but just generally like what is.
yeah.
I mean, if you don't have your glasses on, it doesn't mean the things that you can't see aren't there. You know what I mean?
Mhm,
So like
mhm.
that, it made me think of that. Different levels of lenses, talking about how lenses are built to be invisible, but also like, if you're looking under a microscope or through a camera lens, those are obvious lenses. You're
Mhm.
using a lens to alter your experience with something, which we often have
And they can
conscious
become
thinking.
highly functional, right? That
Highly
they're
functional,
very helpful. And so
very
can many,
useful.
many imagine a top performing athlete putting on the lens of I'm a top performing athlete. That is
Right,
deeply
going out and
helpful for
crushing it.
them,
Yeah,
right? To
totally.
go in and psychologically do good work in the world, right? So it's not
Exactly.
this again, just like this isn't an argument to have no beliefs or do anything like that. This isn't an argument to have no lenses or not use lenses. It's it's a call to understand that this is going on for us psychologically, and then through that new understanding, use lenses really effectively. And what's fantastic is that when the effect of a lens, and you can imagine like a lens focusing down a laser to where it can set things on fire, right? If you take this dispersed light and you focus it down through a lens to cause damage, just removing the lens, even if the light's still there, it just can't focus into this destructive thing anymore. And so psychologically, very often places where we're stuck or things we're super hurt about or things that are hurting our behavior and all this, quite literally just seeing the lens, just seeing. And one way to think about the fundamental shift is to back up your awareness to see the function of your mind looking through lenses, right? Just become aware that this is a part of what's happening for you. And that is not looking through the lens in that moment. That's literally like me taking off my glasses and just considering them, right? I have a different perspective. Now that's the analogy falls apart a bit there because chances are I'm not going to see better without these glasses, but at least I know I have the glasses on and there's some wisdom there. And if these glasses were hurting me, if I left them on, it would make a lot of sense to take them off, right? If they were the wrong prescription or they were giving me headaches or whatever. So that
Yeah.
ability to navigate proper lenses and the right lenses and know how to put them on and take them off in our thinking and our meaning making is crucial.
Yeah, well, and I was also going to say, so there's the conscious lenses of binoculars, microscopes, cameras, that kind of thing. And then there's, you're saying that thought has conscious and unconscious thought. So unconscious thought, maybe the analogy is the glasses are much less conscious to you, right? Because they're always on your face
Mm-hmm.
generally. But even to those, another like lens is the contacts, which are
Yeah.
even less kind of obvious or apparent to other people, right? I
Yeah.
look at you and Rob wears glasses. I can see the glasses on your face. If you had contacts in, I wouldn't even think, oh, he's looking through a lens. So it's just like that's what I like love about this analogy, that it's so
Yeah.
perfect because there are so many like levels of altering your perception, but again, like reminding our listeners that like everything that's there already is there, everything
Mm-hmm.
that's happening already is happening. So like all this is, and you and I could wear, I don't wear glasses, but I could, and it could be a different prescription than yours. I
Mm-hmm.
could wear contacts, you could wear whatever. Like it's not, it's not that everyone should wear glasses or not wear glasses. Like
Correct.
you said, it's not about all or nothing. It's just examining kind of the complexity of thinking through something that I think is a pretty genius analogy of the lenses. So
Yeah. And so it's that second part of the lens. It's the two of them together, right? And it's realizing that that's what our thinking and our attachment to our thought is. So in a sense, let's say that you make up a meaning. You have to make up a meaning. That person said something over there, and it could mean a lot of different things. You choose to interpret it a certain way. You get a grip on your reality right there. You're choosing a certain lens to look at that through. And the assuredness of that lens, right? There's some interpretation that's happening. To your point of like contacts versus glasses that you're using versus not looking through it at all, would be, like LASIK in your eye that's unchangeable, would be you totally believe what happened. There's nothing, if let's say you're deeply offended, it couldn't be reconciled. There's no wiggle room. You know what happened. That's fact. And you're just done. And we can say that's a pretty closed-minded way to be. Like if that's just how you walk through every situation of your life, we'd say, gosh, that person's pretty opinionated. They don't take any slack. They don't want to find out more. They're never looking for nuance, right? Would just make up a person like that, right? That would be somebody really slammed down into assuredness of their meaning. Everything that they see, they know exactly what it is. They're right. Other people are wrong.
right.
That's what's going on. If we back it up, we go, okay, I really felt that hurt, but maybe I'm not positive that's what that meant. Maybe I need to ask, or maybe I need to protect myself, or maybe I need to do whatever. But at least I know I'm adding to, like, my feelings here are part of my interpretation of what happened, not just fact, right? Not just fact.
Right.
And so then I could actually move it out and go, I'm gonna not interpret that at all. Like that could have just been noise, right? That would be maybe no lens or isness, or I'm gonna put it in the past. It's already happened. I don't have to consider it at all. That would be like dropping your attentional filter on that thing at all, right? But what we normally do is we make a meaning. It becomes what it is. We're very sure of it. We might need to like go to therapy over it 3 years later, right? We're deeply attached to what that meaning was. And I think a good description of that is we've interpreted it with our lens, with some lens. And the more invisible that lens is to us, the less we're considering that there was a lens involved at all, is how much we're believing it, right? Just to kind of overlap meaning, thought, belief, lenses, and what's happening here. And so part of the skill that we're doing is in life, this is happening like all the time in every direction, right? You're making meaning about what everybody says, what's happening on social media, what that movie meant, is it safe outside? What did the news mean? Like it's just all over the place all the time. And if we don't know that, like you could have a meaning about yourself, like I don't deserve love or something, right? You could have heard messaging when you were a child, and we would call that like a deep lens that you're carrying. And if it's about you, anytime you're making up meaning about you and anything else, right? That's a very large potential of a lens that you might bring online.
Right.
Right. And so with most people, you might feel, wow, I don't deserve as much as they do. With a certain job, you might has a default go, I don't deserve the raise, whatever. And then maybe you find somebody who speaks to you differently and it doesn't trigger that lens, and you fall in love with this person because around them you don't feel less than for some reason or whatever, right? So this is the complexity of our life. But then in the rest of life, you can't understand why you just can always tell that you're not living up to your thing. And we would say that you've got this deep unconscious lens of not enough, or I don't deserve something. And if we can't see those, if we can't see that we're doing that, it can be deeply confusing in every direction or most directions almost all the time. And this goes into identity and why we end up saying identity shifting, because that ends up being a humongous part of the story of you, whether you see it or not. You end up saying like, I'm just, I'm not that capable, or that'll never be for me. Or, we end up with these narratives that are ultimately a collection of our lenses about ourselves, right? All the meanings that we've made up along the way. Does that make sense?
I mean, as Rob and I were digging through the content, and Rob was building this presentation and training and slides, it kind of hit me in a new way, because we talked about, like, is there a base lens? What is that base lens? Is it identity? Is it duality? And it's, and maybe this is obvious to Rob, but for me, it was kind of a revelation, is that there's an ability to not have any lenses. and everything else is lenses.
Yeah.
And so, whether you strip it down to kind of the base of like good and bad or identity, and we look at kind of those bigger, more unconscious, more set lenses, we'll call them, those are attached. I mean, Rob's talked about heuristics on the podcast. Those come with not only our own meanings, but all these other meanings. And it's never just like, oh, I left one lens on, like I'm good.
Mhm.
Like you're kind of in lenses
Yeah.
or you're in isness,
Yeah.
and different lenses. Another thing that I think we should talk about is context and focus, because
Yeah.
it's not also linear, right? We're like, is this a linear thing? Are you in the middle of, what does it
Mhm.
look like if we were to draw it out, so to speak? And it's very apparent you're kind of in it or you're not in it. And so the skill is kind of navigating when you're in it, but also like knowing how to leave it, because it
Mhm.
is kind of like you're either wearing your contacts and then you're either looking through glasses or, a
Yeah.
camera, or you've got your eyes shut, and so those
Well,
are kind of your options.
in the training, we have a funny picture of a guy wearing like 5 pairs of glasses.
Right.
And that's really what we're walking through life doing. And if we back up even further, we started this talk around thought, but one of our other talks, we've talked about the difference between thought and experience, right? That foundational difference between when we're thinking and making meaning and when we're just experiencing and maybe in isness, right? As a different way to talk about that. That has to do with like, where is our attention in the moment? And so as we start to stack these ideas for everybody, what's happening here is we're gaining hopefully more ability to see all the nuance of what's available to us in awareness of presence, right? Just this moment, we sort of leave time, we come into the now, this much. And I don't mean now as like a judgment of a certain moment in time. I mean the energy of this moment of presence in your own attention, right? It's like, it's that now has an energy that we quite often are judging and slamming down into what things meant. What happened at 2:02 p.m. Where was that person and where were they headed? And science gets into what's the velocity of this and all that judgment about the isness that's going on. And so that judgment muscle that helps us navigate what is in any one moment and make decisions and live our life is super important. But we get lost in that because we lose meaningful access to presence and isness, which is, to oversimplify it, it's a space where you put down all your lenses, you put down all your attachment to meaning, and you just come back to this moment and you just are with what is, right? I'm listening to a piece of music, or I'm deciding to meditate, or I'm walking down the hall, or it doesn't have to be any more complex than that. What normally comes online for everybody is this whole big meaning making engine called thought, right? Which is now going, where am I going? How do I get there? What are my goals? What that person mean? What's happening there? And that's where psychologically we're exhausted, or many of us, right? Many of us are thriving in that and love that. But, for many of us, and we miss that modeling is often a set of lenses that is affecting how we're seeing what we're seeing. And so we're not very good. And we end up being very assured of potentially erroneous meaning about other people, about ourselves, about what's possible, about how to get along with other groups, all the things. And this is what leads to almost all suffering and conflict in our life, right? So
and I guess what I meant about like you're either in lenses or not is that we've talked about like quick fixes or temporary fixes, and I do think there's value in kind of shifting your focus within the meaning making lens structure, putting on different lenses, adjusting your lenses, dropping lenses, but I guess the point for me of this particular episode is so that our listeners know that like there's a path out of it completely, and you can optimize it within it. But like often I think, even though we have a great analogy and it makes a lot of sense, is it doesn't feel obvious to us when it's happening in our own heads, and it is hard to see. And so we become almost victims of the moment, and we're like, oh, I had that positive thought, or I had that reframe.
That's the invisible part. I really want to highlight, like that's the invisible part of lenses. Or right now, let's just oversimplify that. Like, think of lenses as thinking, right? In a sense. So you're making meaning in any moment, and the lens of your thinking, right? The lens of your interpretation has a certain quality, and it could be deadly clear and right on. Your thinking could be perfect, right? It could be exactly right. But quite often it's not, because we're dealing with complexities that have time and other people's intentions and what people meant and all this subtle crazy. And so we end up going, hey, I know what my boss needs. And we work really hard, but we don't really know what our boss needs. We're actually erroneous about that. And so we've suffered and we worked and we did all this extra thing only to find out that's not what they wanted at all. And then we feel crazy. And, that's where we're kind of losing it. And so that grip of reality in the moment is going to always be lenses, to your point. It's always going to be, I have to decide something here, like what happened, and I'm going to make my best guess at that. If I don't know that lenses are making some of that meaning making and the rules about that meaning making invisible to me, then I could really feel horribly like a victim or whatever. But like when Sarah says you're either in lenses or you're in isness, that's the same or very similar to saying you're either in thought or you're in experience, right? I wanted to
totally
oversimplify
completely
that.
yeah no
right?
thank you for highlighting that. And I was just kind of wanting to point back to the fundamental shift, because what I see happening with our clients or people that kind of start to do this work is because lenses are our thinking is elusive to us often.
Yeah.
We'll think we've fixed the problem, but what we've done is we switched a couple lenses, which does give you a breakthrough, which does cause change, which can be profound, can be wonderful, but it isn't the whole thing, which is why I'm going to keep, cheering on the side for fundamental shift, because, and I've said it before, I'll say it again. I think this is what we need to learn how to do to evolve as humans, because that to me is like the foundation and the start and the answer to what's going on. And so for everyone who's like, I fixed that, I got that business coach, I had that therapy breakthrough, we did the relationship counseling, I went to the parenting class, great. And there's a faster, better path, which is to see the whole system, step out of it and be able to step back into it, which is the fundamental shift.
Correct. Yep. 100%. And I mean, I don't know why I'm so passive, because I'm so excited that you pointed that out. I mean, like that's really the point. And I'm not going to say this well, I'm pretty sure. I'm already in debates with other people, and I'm trying to find better ways to say this. There are reasons that I think we'll be able to show very soon as to why this is foundational and why this truly is the next thing. And even, 20 years ago, I was saying that this is like the evolution of consciousness, right? There is a way to see your meaning making that is a root cause that lets you understand your own belief mechanisms, your own lenses, your own thinking, and all that stuff, that when you add that to the mix, it truly elevates the quality of your thinking, experiencing everything. And I think ultimately it might challenge at the deepest levels, and here's where I'll get weird as usual, what we mean by math and science and things like that, like all the way down, because I think that as humans, the whole structure of our, let's say, evolutionary, how we think is based in very slammed down times and judgments and all these things. And so then how we make meaning about everything else is based on this certain way of looking at reality. And as we can see that this is something that we're doing, and we gain this wisdom of what we're talking about with this fundamental shift, it's not just, to your point, like, oh, I figured out business coaching or this one answer to this one problem. It's an answer to almost the human condition, right? It's an answer to how humans have to relate to each other and information and meaning making in general, which is why this is, I'm not as interested in just coaching on specific problems or whatever. I want to coach on this because this is the universal key to running your mind and your emotions and your behavior and everything better, right? Just in a
well,
much
and it
more...
empowers you to then fix your single issue. So if you're like, I'm really looking to get help with my business or my relationships or my parenting or my money or my health, learning this skill of going in and out of your lenses, having the fundamental shift, mastering identity shifting, that's what lets you then fix it for yourself.
Yeah.
You will never have to go to somebody and be like, I don't know what's going on necessarily, because you'll have the tools and the exercises and the ability to kind of do it yourself.
Yeah.
And we talked about this the other day when we were talking about how this kind of relates to the fundamentals of like math and numbers and stuff. And we've talked on the podcast about how it's about the fundamental shift training. The identity shifting is kind of the skill to navigate through life. But then ultimately, like what we're trying to do is create a societal shift. And to me, I can sum it up in like 3 sentences, which is that this we'll go back to beliefs. We talked about beliefs, the assuredness of meaning, and how this meaning impacts us even at the levels of math and science, right? Our assuredness that money, which is a number in a bank account somewhere, has value, and we agree upon it as a society, is to me, one of the single factors of why we do anything ever, why we get out of bed, how our society is structured, what our government does, what our healthcare does. Like, it's kind of the core to everything. And it's so funny because it's like, oh, well, someone might listen to this and be like, well, why do I need to kind of have a grip on this? It's because look at how in your own life, just like, and for those listening, take a minute and think about how much of your life is a reaction to a meaning that you are assured is the truth. And then tell yourself, I can either control that or I can let that run me. And instantly like feel that difference between, wow, this is really out of control for me and I really need to kind of hone this skill. Maybe you're like, oh, I totally got this and this is all vibing with you, which is great. But maybe you're like, oh my gosh, I can now see, before I started, listening to this episode 30 minutes ago or whatever, I couldn't see that like I'm running 20,000 things every day based off of this, whatever it is for you, the thought about yourself, the thought about money, thought about what happened to you, your addiction, but whatever it is, and be like, oh gosh, I have no grip, and feel that kind of out of controlness, because that's what we're trying to fix and heal. And if we can all do that for ourselves, then like that creates a different world to be in.
Totally. That's so great. And what's funny is the invisibleness of this is what makes it hard for you to see, because for you, what you believe, the assuredness of your meaning, feels immovable. It feels factual. It feels like when somebody sees the boss and they're sure that look meant what it meant, it's a deep surprise. We talked about surprise before, to find out that wasn't right. And if we start to talk about money and how that's just an agreement in society today, like we went to the fiat currency system and now we're dealing with Bitcoin and crypto and all its forms, all this thing, how do we navigate what wealth is and exchange of value? All of those are agreements between people, right? Those are things, but they feel incredibly solid. And if you, and I'm not saying that they're not relevant, right? Like your landlord is still going to expect rent, et cetera. But if we're going to meaningfully change society in profound and big ways, we have to become aware much more viscerally and every day that like, wow, this is not as solid as we thought it was. This is an agreement between people. And we can actually, what's great is, unlike just morphing the chair into something else that would take tooling and physical things and time and all that, thoughts and meanings can actually shift in the moment, right? We could actually make a new decision about how we treat each other, healthcare, whether we get along with a certain nation or not. And we notice that kind of quick switching even in the news, right? Like all of a sudden, if the news changes, we just go, oh, I guess that's what it is now. And we realize we feel differently about something. And now we kind of go a different way. And that's what's on the table for how malleable our collective is, how much we could decide to get along or not. Like all the different things are in really beautiful ways, like very, very changeable and awesome. However, we have to be able to see the part of this that's invisible, which is our own assuredness of meaning and our own kind of clutching to what we're sure, is, rather than be able to start playing with, well, could it be different? Could it be something else? What's possible here?
Well, that's why I like that it's a skill, because another thing another example that we've talked about probably before in the past, you might have heard, somebody cuts you off on the freeway and they're driving crazy and you're pissed off and you're like, what's going on? You find out that they were like maybe rushed into the hospital or something. It's the skill of detaching, because remember we said beliefs itself could be great, but it's the level of attachment. So detaching from that one belief and maybe holding that one and adding like 6 or 7 others, and you find out actually, his kid's sick and he's rushing to the hospital to be with his kid. And that's like totally different. They're like, get here in an hour. The kid's not going to make it. You feel totally different. And like I was saying kind of earlier in the episode, we're talking about single beliefs in our examples, but really we're more complex than that, because one belief and heuristics and strings and all the stuff, you guys check out the training, because I'm not saying it well, but all the things that go along with this, with an assuredness of meaning.
Yes.
If you can loosen that, then it's a skill. and then you'll see it in other places. You'll see a chain reaction of it. So it's not just like, and I think that's why we sometimes use the word magical around this kind of capability, because it feels magical, because it's not one and then another and then another, where you literally have to go through everything. We call this like a single fix, because the skill of having it allows you not only to do it for different beliefs, but then that like creates a chain reaction where you're like, oh, maybe you're like, you do something to help it. You're like, oh, I'm gonna make sure that he really gets there on time. And it totally can change more than just one single thing. The loosening of attachment to one single belief that might be not helpful or limiting can then have a chain reaction to so many things and help you do it again in the future or to other beliefs.
Yeah. So I love that. And that is for the usefulness of like one lens, especially if it's a closer to base lens about yourself in some deep way, or about the world, or some, and by the way, I think a side note is to say that just hearing this, maybe you might go, I don't have any idea what they're talking about. You might say, wow, this sounds nice, but I have no idea how to do it. I mean, that's the point of the people that we work with, right? The people that come on board, we have processes so that you can actually find what's invisible to you, because sometimes you need, and I always in a bunch of presentations I say the brain surgeon often can't do brain surgery on themselves because they just don't have the right perspective. So the fact that these are potentially invisible to you, and some of the deepest meanings that you're stuck on, or deepest kind of self-beliefs or whatever that you have going on for you persistently, they're going to be invisible to you. Now, that doesn't mean they're impossible to find yourself. There's things like shadow work, and you could talk to somebody, but quite often it's a conversation with a smart friend at a bar, or working with a therapist, or working with a coach that can help you illuminate, oh my God, I never saw that I've been doing this since I was a kid. And wow, that had all these costs to me, or whatever. So we have developed a system to really look for those, show you how to change them, show you how to do this fundamental shift. And that's important. So I don't want people like not thinking that it's not
that's
just
that's a great point.
There's really clear ways to go in individually, like with each person, with whatever your personal situation is, to find what your current code is, right? What's going on for you personally. But so I just want to make sure people understood that. The other thing I want to say, back to how you're saying it's complex and they're all kind of overlapping or touching, is that our grip on reality is a mashup of lots of meanings that we're making about ourselves, the world, the other person, the intention, what we'd like to be, right? There's all these different parts to it. And if you change any one part of that, the whole equation changes, right? If all of a sudden I go from not capable to totally capable, or even slightly capable, well, now I'm more confident in this relationship. I'm more excited to do behaviors at my job. I now can show up and work out differently. Like your whole life, right, from this one kind of lens shift, ultimately can be deeply affected, because any moment, any grip on reality in the moment is a mashup of lots of these meanings. And so we can also feel that when we talk with a therapist or a coach or something like that about the complexity of something. If we go, I don't know what to do for the holidays because I feel this way about that person, but I'm worried they don't feel the same way. And then, gosh, my family's going to be upset if I don't do that. Like, our whole life is this big kind of network of important things that are all like, how do they relate? And what's my best choice here? And how should I behave? And all that. All of those are meanings about what your family expects and what this person wants and what's going on here. Again, this isn't to not consider that or make no meaning about any of them. However, we want the skill to break up with the meaning that we are making in the moment and come back to it with more wisdom and see, is there anything here that I'm overly attached to? Like in that example, if I'm super worried about what everybody else is thinking, maybe inside I have a belief about myself, like I'll only be loved if I behave properly, or, and so that would be a core lens that we could go in and alter so that you have a sense of confidence. And then you see that it's much easier to navigate the holidays with the person that you're dating and what your family's going to think. And you can set boundaries and do all these things just by this one tweak. It affects, 1,000 things in your life.
Right. And that's where I think, like, again, I like to draw the line between us and kind of law of attraction, because it's, like you were saying, oh, one lens, optimizing one lens can change a lot of things. Well, in the same way, one lens that's faulty can affect like a lot of things. And so if there's a, we'll call it a base lens, and you've optimized lenses out here, like, oh, I want to be a millionaire or whatever, but you have
Mhm.
no sense of like self, then, which is also a lens, then, what is that going to do? So it's about having the right, looking at the right place and fixing the right thing. But also, it's not just like, I kind of just want to go back to what I was saying before, is it's not just what in this field of lenses, or we call it duality. We talked about duality on our last episode. It's not just in the meaning making realm. It's like, can you leave it? And that's where I think we might get some listeners who are like, oh yeah, I'm tracking and I got this and I can see the way my mind works. But like, do you have that ability to leave it?
Mhm.
Because I think a lot of us can do kind of work within our own thoughts and our own models, but like that really, and it took me, and I'm just kind of emphasizing it because you and I have talked about it a lot since I've started working for you and been on this team. And I thought that I got it in the beginning, and it took more than I thought to actually really get what you meant.
Yeah, I think
when
it
you
took a
said
long
leave.
time. I mean, you never worked with me like as a client.
Oh
so
yeah,
you never
sorry.
had
But I
that
mean,
experience,
doing
but you've been
this-
around it enough.
Right.
And I think it's a really good point to bring up, that it can feel like you understand this and you still don't really have it at all. And I don't
Right.
want to like take it away, because it
Sure,
doesn't mean that it's hard. It's just that what we're talking about is not, it's not another thought. It's not another meaning where you go, oh, I've got a grip of what they mean by that. Cool, good, I'm done. It's truly a skill of knowing, when are you making meaning? When are you not? When are you in modeling of reality? When are you not? And if that's not obvious to you, like really obvious, then you don't really get what we're talking about at the level that you could. Hopefully it's still helpful. Hopefully you get, oh, I shouldn't just have to think about that way. Or gosh, when he mentioned that worry about my friends, yeah, maybe I should be more confident or whatever. Like, those are great tips. Those are, what you'll go get at any old coach on the corner, hey, just think this thought instead, whatever. But we're talking about actually understanding the function of your mind that is doing the modeling itself, and leaving that meaningfully whenever you want to, for either a moment or for some longer period of time, and then coming back on with a new sense of having seen the invisible. And right, because as soon as you break up with that, you realize that all of your attachments to your meaning making are simply that. And so leaving it meaningfully into isness, into this, this fundamental shift to see that meaning making process from a different perspective, that is truly putting down all the meaning and realizing like, oh, I'm deeply solidified in this, I'm believing a certain reality, and I don't have to be attached to that reality. Let me leave and come back in. And what you'll find is many people will then just recreate the exact same thing, same rules, same. And if that's true, if that's persistent, let's say you have some access to isness and you're going in and out of this, if you come back in and you're making the same thing, there's probably a base lens that's still invisible to you, so that when your lenses come online and you begin modeling and making meaning, you just keep deciding the same things that you probably could decide differently and make a whole different meaning structure. And so that, again, is like maybe the difference between the fundamental shift and the skill of identity shifting, which is, choosing different wisdom. But they're deeply linked. They really go together. And, each is certainly valuable, but they're way more powerful together when you put them together in a meaningful way.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I love this conversation, and I think that I believe this is kind of like the 5th podcast since our little break, and to me, I'm really excited that we got to this conversation for 2 reasons. One, I think this is kind of, for me, like really interesting, right? Because this is where we can start to really apply it, and it's not just this concept and what do I do with it. Like this feels very applicable in any moment, like right now, even.
Yeah.
But also kind of this series kind of set up the words and the concepts that go into what I hope that we can now kind of offshoot from in future episodes. But this is kind of like a little moment in time in the podcast of these last 5 episodes, talking about, the fundamental shift, thinking, awareness, focus, meaning making, and now lenses. And like, I am excited for future conversations where we can use all of those concepts. And if they feel unclear, hopefully you can either reference this episode or past episodes to kind of go forward and talk about very kind of specific things, and how we can do this better and just be happier and more connected.
And there's a lot more to layer. I mean, future episodes hopefully will go deep into just emotions, right? How do we manage and master emotions, what is this attentional focus thing, in more depth? What are we, how do we do relationships at a totally different level in a different way?
How does
I'm
addiction
excited.
play into it? Codependency, self-parenting. Like, I can't wait to keep going with this, but I just, for like our listeners, just kind of know, like, I feel like the last kind of series of episodes are really foundational to what we talk about a lot. And I think that
Mhm.
you have done it better than ever. So, and
No.
check out the training too.
Awesome. Yeah. Training coming soon. Yeah.
Coming
Perfect.
soon.
Awesome. Well, that sounds like a good place to stop. And I really appreciate this. As always, it's so fun talking about this, especially with you. And thanks for being here to the listeners. We really appreciate it. Please be kind to yourself and everybody else. And we'll talk to you really soon. Bye-bye.